Hey, I'm Becca.
And I'm Anuja.
And today we hope to use our presentation to show you how you can connect North Carolina to the world as well as we have.
We're thrilled to have this opportunity to speak to you and be a part of this great TEDx event. So we'd like to share with you our experiences in working in social justice and forging partnerships in social justice movements.
So one of the best ways to make connections is to put yourself in an environment where connections are accessible and facilitated. And for me and Anuja, that was NC State. We want you to then learn to use these connections to serve and help meet the needs in your community.
Right, now why are connections so important? It's a fact of life that we rely on each other for various needs throughout life. And we achieve together and we succeed together. And when you're looking at the larger issues of problems in social justice, it's very natural that you tap into the largest network that you can. So you really have to connect with others to make as big an impact as you can. So at NC State, we really pride ourselves on being a school with tremendous global reach. My involvement with the University Scholars Program in particular has been a phenomenal way to really expose me to as many issues as I could. I'm a Raleigh native. I've never lived anywhere else, and so the Scholars Program has really been how I saw the world for something bigger than just Raleigh like I knew. I've always had a passion for social justice and for women's issues, but Scholars really provided a forum and a sounding board to make connections with others and to learn about how these issues connect.
I was also a Scholars here at NC State, and I see a lot of brothers and sister Scholars here, so I'm really excited to see your faces. And I also really gained a lot of exposure through Scholars because I actually came from a really rural community in North Carolina in the foothills and didn't have a whole lot of ideas about what was outside my own community until I came to NC State. And so Scholars exposed me not only to global communities but to global issues and how those issues are so impacted by the lives we live here as well. So then I also joined the movement here at NC State, which helped facilitate my growth and advocacy for women's issues and interpersonal violence prevention.
Right. There's a powerful reason we emphasize making connections with respect to social movements, and that reason is that so many of these social movements are intertwined by their very nature. And so the most reasonable way to connect these issues together is to connect to people that are studying these issues as well.
Yeah, and the organization that we want to talk about for just a little bit is Women NC. So women represent just over half the population in our world today. And Women NC is a local nonprofit organization that advocates for the ratification of CEDAW, which is the Committee for the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, which it's a UN treaty that has been ratified by the majority of countries all around the world. I think there's like 7 that haven't ratified CEDAW. One of which is the United States. We're in the running with Iran. Do you remember the others? A couple others that it's a pretty embarrassing thing that the US has not yet ratified CEDAW because it would really help us legally make sure that women are receiving the same rights in the United States. So right now, women only make an average of 78 cents for every dollar that a man makes. And that's just unacceptable in an environment in a country where we pride ourselves for being equal. Women NC also provides a wonderful opportunity to students, college students in North Carolina, to do research on women's issues at the local level.
Right, and so 5 of us were actually selected this year to study aspects of lives relating to women here in North Carolina and connect those issues to women across the world. And so 5 of us this year, we conducted our research and then we presented this research to the CSW conference at the UN, the Commission on the Status of Women.
Yeah, so my research focused on human trafficking, especially for sexual exploitation because that's the majority of human trafficking for sexual slavery is women and girls. And there's somewhere between 700,000 and 30 million people that are victims of modern day slavery in our world today. And that might sound like a foreign thing, something that happens elsewhere, not in North Carolina, not in the United States. But in reality, hundreds of thousands of women and girls who are US citizens are enslaved and coerced to sell their body for sex acts on the streets, and especially through gangs and gang involvement. And we know that a child that enters into sexual enslavement, their life expectancy shortens to only 7 years after they enter that form of slavery. That means that a 13-year-old girl is not going to make it to her 21st birthday. That's simply unacceptable that this is even going on in the United States, but that statistic shows the actual brutality of this crime. The organizations that I worked with was, one of which was the North Carolina Coalition Against Human Trafficking. And I guess the great news is North Carolina is doing a wonderful job of starting to address human trafficking in North Carolina. We have rapid response teams that the North Carolina Coalition Against Human Trafficking has created to help survivors of human trafficking get the legal aid and the survivor support that they need. But we also need a cultural shift, a movement that says that buying women and girls for sex is not acceptable. And so a lot of my training for the movement really came in handy with wanting to present solutions at the global stage for this issue.
Absolutely. My research was actually on the political participation of women in North Carolina and around the world. As part of my research, I was able to interview several women that ran for and have served in public office here in North Carolina, including Secretary of State Elaine Marshall. That was really great getting to meet her. I found out that women make up a disproportionately small percentage of public offices. For example, in the North Carolina General Assembly, only 22% of the General Assembly is composed of women. The U.S. Congress, only 17% of women compose the U.S. Congress. And worldwide, only about 17% of all political offices are held by women. And when women make up 50% of the population, you can see how women are just dramatically underrepresented in decision-making bodies. And I learned that women face a lot of obstacles in running for public office, the most primary of which is in terms of support, both financial support in terms of contributions and support in terms of running their campaigns as well. I introduced the organization Lillian's List of North Carolina as a best practice model because Lillian's List recruits women and actually actively helps train them to run successful winning campaigns here in North Carolina.
So a big part of this process was the collaboration that we all went through.
Right, we collaborated on the university level, the community level, the state, the national, and the international level, and that experience has been very, very powerful.
Yeah, and during this process, we researched local issues and were able to take local solutions then to the global level. And we were able to find that not only those issues and solutions could be used in other situations around the globe, but also it's not that dissimilar. Like a lot of the problems that we face here in the United States are also faced by women and girls around the world and the communities that support them.
This experience also gave us incredible opportunities for partnerships and to be mentored and just kind of see the intergenerational collaboration that was happening at this big UN conference. For example, there was this big speech by Lema Bowie. She was the 2011 Nobel Peace Prize winner, actually, and she won this Nobel Peace Prize for the way that she rallied up the women in Liberia together to help end the Second Liberian Civil War. It was phenomenal what she said, and just the fact that she was there just meant so much to everyone that was seeing her give this speech, because everyone in that room was an activist in some way, shape, or form. And this was a woman that came full circle in her activism, and that's why just being able to see her was so powerful for us. I met women involved with international organizations working on women's issues, some from San Francisco, some from Norway, some from Scotland, and this was pretty embarrassing, but they were mature women and they saw us and they said, you are our future. And so I had to say, well, yes, but we stand on the shoulders of the giants that came before you, and that's every activist that's ever worked on any kind of a cause like this before.
Yeah, and the mentorship and the people that we met and the women that supported us while we were there, and even that supported us in the local community organizations that we partnered with. It was amazing to build those connections with those older women and men who had so much to share on their experiences so that we can take away their solutions that they found to make even bigger and better solutions for the problems that we face in our generation.
Mm-hmm. I would say that in the 1 week that we spent at this UN conference, I learned more than I would have reading 100 books on the various subjects, just because there were dozens and dozens of NGOs there, and there were dozens and dozens of presentations that these NGOs brought to us, and where they explained the issues that they were so passionate about and what some of their proposed solutions were. I learned about issues that I didn't even know existed for women, and I would say I was pretty well informed of women's issues before I went. So it was a tremendous learning experience overall.
Yeah, and the status of women and girls throughout the world, North Carolina and everywhere else, is extremely important to me as a woman, but also just as a global citizen. Women are the individuals that raise families and are the primary caregivers in most families still today. And so I think everyone in this room can think of a woman in their life that has impacted them, whether it was their sister or their mother or just their best friend. All of those women really impact all of us. And one of the really great experiences I got to have while at the conference is getting to meet with an organization called US Women Connect, which is pretty self-explanatory. What the organization does is allow women around the United States to connect with each other, to start building those partnerships and relationships so that we can have support with each other, even though we're all around the world. We're not necessarily all in one place like a certain population would be.
I really enjoyed meeting women that had actually served in political positions in their respective countries. I even met a few that had political ambitions of their own for the future. And when they described their difficulties to me, I realized that they sounded just like what Elaine Marshall had said and what the other women I had met here in North Carolina had expressed in terms of their difficulties in running for public office. And that's what really solidified it to me. That is when I really realized that local issues really are nearly identical to global issues many, many times.
Yeah, and one of the discussion circles that I was able to participate in, it was really cool. There were women in our circle from the Caribbean, which they had really cool accents, by the way, and from Afghanistan and Africa, and we all were talking about the challenges around talking about sexual violence and getting survivors to feel empowered to speak out against the experiences they have had. And we all went back to, when you can't talk about sex or have sex education in these communities, talking about sexual violence is not even possible. And so it was so empowering on one end to find that this wasn't just a problem that we have here in North Carolina or in rural communities that I'm from. It's a problem from all over the world, and I got to hear some really cool experiences and solutions to that problem that different NGOs had created within their communities.
It was phenomenal, the kinds of people that we met. For example, at one session, I met this woman that had something in common with me, and that is that she had been born and brought up in the same country or in the same city that she had always been in, and that was London. And London is probably my favorite city in the world, so that was exciting for me to see that there's also someone else out there that's lived in the same city forever. And she talked about how she was a successful businesswoman, and then at one point she took a trip to Ethiopia, and she witnessed the practice of female genital cutting. Now, that's not something that I'm very familiar with myself, but she saw this practice, and she saw how much it hurt the women that were cut, and she found that this was a widespread practice across Africa, South America, and parts of Asia. And she decided that after having seen this, she couldn't just go back to her comfortable life as a businesswoman still. So what she did was she started an organization called the Orchid Project. And what the Orchid Project does is work to spread awareness of female genital cutting and also to see that the practice diminishes and stops. And just meeting her and hearing about her journey was tremendously powerful to me. I couldn't help but think how brave she was to leave behind her comfortable life to fight for something she cared for so strongly.
And something that's amazing about this experience and about my whole growth through NC State up until now is that I've realized that the decisions we make don't always just affect like our communities, NC State community, Raleigh community, or even our country, but they affect other people around our world. Whether it's the products we buy, which encourage companies on whether to support a company that has a good practices for their employees and that's not having child slaves that are not making any money, or having good practices for their workers, or just sustainable practices for their products. We control that with our dollar. And it's amazing just how one decision that we make here can impact people from all over the world. And it really has hit me that, we're no longer islands. Our world is becoming increasingly interconnected. And while that might be a little scary because we have to think about our actions so much more and the impact they have, it also means that we're not alone in our cause and that we have people behind us that can support us, and making those connections makes that easier.
Absolutely. Now I want to empower you all to engage in your own community. Find your passion and get involved in any way that you can. One of my favorite quotes is actually by Anne Frank, and she once said, "How wonderful it is that no one need wait a single moment before starting to improve it." So let's take a word of advice from her. I think that's beautifully put. Join us and let's see how we can shape the world together. Thank you.
Thank you.